Over the course of his life, he came to desire peace, but peace in the form of utter and complete emptiness. This was the ambition of the most powerful Sith Lord who ever lived. This was a Dark Lord who came to be known by many names: Tenebrae, Vitiate, the Sith Emperor, and finally Valkorion. But he was one individual that became the most powerful Sith to ever live, and he almost became the most powerful, forceful being to ever exist in all of the lore. Anyone who knows anything about Vitiate is aware of his godlike power, how he essentially became a pure entity of willpower and dark ambition. He took the philosophy of limitless power to study all aspects of the Force, and with that knowledge he consumed entire worlds and populations to feed his endless power and ever-extending lifespan. With both immortality in the flesh and the ability to transfer his consciousness and spirit at will, it seemed as though nothing could stop this maniac with a god complex and the ability to achieve actual godhood. But in reality, he had one very specific weakness that plagued him throughout his long life, a weakness that his enemies exploited time and time again until he was eventually destroyed. Welcome back to the Archives, Acolytes. In today's Holocron, we are once again revisiting Emperor Valkorion in order to discuss what the most powerful Sith in history feared the most. Doing character studies on the Sith Emperor is usually a very difficult task. Even the most dastardly Sith Lords had some sense of humanity that made them an interesting study. And by humanity, we aren't talking about a literal human. We mean the innate thought processes and feelings shared by all sentient beings, those that have consciousness and a heart. Even the most evil Dark Lords have a semblance of humanity to them that we can break down. It's from those places of morality where their dreams and desires of immortality stem. But Darth Vitiate is much unlike any of them because he had no humanity left at all. He was basically born as an incarnation of Satan himself. His eyes were described as black as night. Animals feared him. He fed on cruelty and had become a murderous tyrant before he reached double digits in age. He felt very little emotion and was removed from the way other sentient beings lived and behaved. In the purest sense, the child born as Tenebrae was a pure manifestation of the dark side of the Force. But soon his evil would take him to places no other Sith had gone before. After Naga Sadow's hyperspace war ended in complete failure, the Tenebrae, then called Vitiate, summoned 8,000 Dark Lords to his home planet of Nathema. There he dominated their minds and forced them to conduct a ritual which drained the Force energy from all sentient creatures on the planet, and from the world itself. It eradicated every living thing, and all of that energy was funneled into Vitiate himself. His power skyrocketed to exponential levels, and his lifespan was greatly extended. However, the ritual of Nathema affected the young Emperor beyond just empowering his strength. The price of immortality meant that he no longer experienced any of the basic senses that normal people had. He sacrificed the ability to taste, touch, and smell. He no longer saw color, and even emotions meant nothing. All of those basic sensations were replaced by an unbearable searing pain that would never lessen or go away. Now having achieved what so many Sith Lords had hungered for, he was completely disconnected from the basics of mortal existence. Despite his new living hell, he convinced himself that this was evidence of apotheosis. He believed that he had transcended the mortal bounds of humanity and was now a god. He didn't believe that he was on the road to godhood. He believed that he had actually ascended. And so now mortal beliefs and concerns were beneath him. Like Darth Nihilus, he was now a being of pure will and intent to dominate, though on a much broader scale. It was his dream to outlive the cosmos, to destroy everything and to see the universe at peace in nothingness. The Jedi hero of Tython confronted Valkorion about this belief, pointing out that destroying everything would leave him a ruler of nothing. But Valkorion, now either so powerful or so insane, believed that if he wanted to unmake, it was his right as a deity. His response was this: you discern a fraction of reality. Beyond these stars exist other galaxies, other worlds, other beings. I will experience or ignore them as I wish. I will spend eternity becoming everything: a farmer, an artist, a simple man. When the last living thing in the universe finally dies, I will enjoy peace and wait for the cycle to begin again. What Valkorion is saying about becoming everything has to do with his unique ability to split his consciousness, to inhabit the minds and bodies of countless other beings across the stars. When he fully became Valkorion, he did this much less often than he had before, but he could experience the lives of others by living through them, and it had become his dream to become everything and everyone as a hive mind. And in the end, he wanted to watch it all perish. And when nothing was left besides himself and the Force, he would become the owner of the Force itself, and watch the universe begin anew. His dream was to become an elder god, then watch the universe cycle over and over again. He would allow it to develop only to destroy it again and enjoy the peace of silence that happened in between. When viewing these maddening and existential ideas, it can be mind-boggling to imagine that such a man feared anything. But there was one vestige of humanity left within him, a fear that plagues every living entity no matter how bestial or divine: the fear of death. In the wisdom of Darth Sidious, all those who gain power are afraid of losing it, and it was said of Emperor Valkorion that he felt nothing but two things: the craving of power and the fear of death. This is the one thing that connects him with all Sith who have come before, as all of them sought to escape the final judgment that comes for every man. But the difference with Valkorion is that he actually almost succeeded. Using his vast knowledge and incredible abilities and resources, he gained more and more power until he could be considered a deity. And Valkorion believed that he had succeeded. There were many who also saw him as a god. He became so ascendant that he found the ways of the Sith to be limiting, the very same ways which were meant to lead one to godhood. He had achieved their ideal and now found their focus to be lacking. But there's something very interesting about the fact that he came closer than anyone else to surpassing death, which made the fear of it all the more real to him. Because he had used the ritual of Nathema to extend his life, he lived for over 1,000 years, watching entire star systems rise and fall. He was eons of ages old, but the longer that he lived, the more despaired the thought of dying would hit him. Valkorion attempted to convince himself that he was a master of death, and he ruined, ruled, or took the lives of all of those around him. But in the end, he was only a reminder that death will come for all, and so he became extremely paranoid as his life grew on. He split his consciousness into several vessels now. These vessels included sleeper agents that had pieces of his will within them, all known as the children of the Emperor, his flesh puppets. Otherwise, he chose one or a few very specific vessels who were hollowed out to become the voices of the Emperor, beings who carried not only his consciousness, but also a large portion of his immense power. Meanwhile, his real form was closed off from the outside galaxy entirely. Vitiate, his true self, shut himself in his chambers and allowed no one, not even the Dark Council, to see or interact with him. Vitiate feared anyone getting close enough to actually harm him, and so he armed himself with a highly trained royal guard force, all of whom were empowered by his own abilities in the Force, extensions of his will imbued with his own power. But as secure as his protection was, it only served to betray how truly frightened he was. He had built himself a cage. There was no being that could challenge his power, not even the redeemed Revan, who could command both sides of the Force. Even he was not powerful enough to challenge the Emperor. Vitiate defeated Revan handily and imprisoned him for centuries. However, he succeeded in a way that no one had anticipated. Revan actually frightened Vitiate. Revan, while he was imprisoned, used all of his abilities to hold Vitiate back subconsciously, stopping Vitiate from invading the Republic for 300 years, proving to him that he could be beaten. Revan was never going to win, but where he did succeed was by playing on the Emperor's fear and his paranoia. Revan proved that he had every reason to be afraid, that he was not a god. In reality, the Republic and the Jedi were horrifically weak in this period. They were divided, and Vitiate's empire would have wiped them out. But by waiting another 300 years, the Republic and the Jedi were able to build strength and unite yet again. By the time of the conflict known as the Great Galactic War, they were able to fight Vitiate's empire to a stalemate. Towards the end of his life, Valkorion would project his fear onto his own children by doing everything he could to control them. He was less impressed by the twins Arcan and Thexan, but greatly feared his daughter Valen, who had inherited much of his latent incredible powers. He took her to his home planet where the Nathema Zealots tortured and reconditioned her to be totally obedient to a single activation phrase. Valkorion used this phrase to control her all her life, fearing that one day she could rise against him and eventually even destroy him. But all of his torture, manipulation, control, and greed only served to surround him with more enemies that he knew what to do with. And when his physical body was killed at last, his spirit inhabited the mind of Satele Shan, where he attempted to take over her body and return once more. In the mindscape of Satele, he manifested himself as the three faces that he was best known by: Tenebrae, Vitiate, Valkorion. But he stopped when the spirits and the mental images of all of those lives that he had tampered with and destroyed confronted him. He attempted to gain power by dominating all of them, but collectively, they resisted. Each one of them stepped forward to mock him and prove that his vanity betrayed his true fear of death. Vitiate and the three manifestations were unable to destroy or push back all of the beings who were rising against him. Feeling powerless, he grasped for control, only to be confronted by his worst fear. And just like that, fear alone was enough to consume him and destroy his spirit once and for all. He may have been an immortal being, but he had a very mortal anxiety. Death comes for all, and while the Jedi make many mistakes in their pursuit of the Force, they at least understand this principle and are able to make peace with death. And even those who have enough selflessness, love, and compassion are able to retain their identity after death, manifest and guiding as Force spirits. But the Sith have no such feelings, and sometimes only survive as very limited specters, tethered to one item or a location. And even then, they are only a shadow of who they once were, and are eventually banished to chaos. Vitiate came the closest of any Sith to ever achieving perfect immortality, but the more he gained, the more he had to lose, and so the more that the fear increased and consumed him. It's ironic, the more he avoided death, the more real the threat of death became to him. But anyway, my friends, this was the only weakness of the most powerful Sith in history. We love diving into these more philosophical studies and discussions, so give us your thoughts on this and Vitiate as a whole down below. A lot of the time, Vitiate can feel like an unknowable entity due to his detachment from mortality, but he can be extremely intriguing when you dig into exactly what makes him tick and what he really fears. Maybe at the end of it all, Vitiate really didn't believe that he was a god after all. Maybe that is the fear that he had within his heart for his entire life, that no matter how long he lived, no matter how much he attained, that he would eventually die. He would eventually have to obey the laws of the galaxy and of the Force itself. Vitiate's fear of death was not immediate, it was delayed, creeping in slowly over centuries of existence. For a time, he seemed to have conquered the inevitable, pushing the boundaries of mortality so far that even the Force itself seemed unable to claim him. He existed in bodies of his own making, voices of his own will, fragments of consciousness that spanned empires. Yet in chasing the eternal, he hollowed himself out. His fear did not fade, it waited, festering beneath every victory. The longer Vitiate lived, the more fragile his godhood became, until the idea of death became more terrifying than death itself. He came closer than any being in history to transcending the Force, to becoming something beyond life and death. But in doing so, he severed himself from everything that made existence meaningful. The sensations of life, the emotional currents of the Force, the chaos and the beauty of feeling. It was all gone, destroyed by his own hand. What remained was not enlightenment, but absence, a void masquerading as power. Vitiate believed he had evolved past mortality, but he had only entombed himself within his own fear. The irony of Darth Vitiate is that he had already died long before his final destruction. His pursuit of power demanded the sacrifice of his soul, his senses, and his very humanity. He achieved immortality, but only as a shell, a corpse animated by hunger. When his spirit was finally consumed and dispersed, it was not the death of a god, but the inevitable collapse of a man who had been dead for millennia. But what do you think? If a being can live forever but feels nothing, dreams of nothing, and exists only to control, is that still a life? Or is immortality just another kind of prison for them? Thank you for joining me in the archives here today, and may the Force be with you.